So when Diane Abbott said that people of colour should not allow themselves to be divided, well, she couldn't have imagined that up on the show tonight would pop Rehman, Chishti MP, a Tory MP for Gillingham, who thinks she should be sacked. Rehman, full marks for coming on the show, my friend. Tell me why you think Diane Abbott should be sacked.
Well, George, I think what we have to look at is in terms of the context it was said, and I think, the words that were said, in my view, looking at it carefully, are very offensive and discriminatory. And I think, of course, wherever racism occurs, whether it's with football or with sport or whether it's in other aspects of, community or criminal offences, then of course we have to make sure it's dealt with properly and effectively. And I think, if we look at the scenario over here where you have somebody if you had somebody from the English community making that remark about...
What do you mean English community? She's as English as any other English person.
Well, I think, George, of course.
Well, see, you've just made a blunder yourself.
No, it's not about a blunder. I think what we have is...
It is a blunder. You conflated English with white.
No, not at all. I think...
You just did. Do you want me to play it back to you?
George, I think what I'm trying to say, actually, is in terms of rather than trying to fall into the category of defining people by their ethnic origin, which is what Diane did and made that broad brush comment, I think, which was completely unacceptable. And I think, in my view, I think it's if Ed Miliband had been strong enough, could have taken a firmer action. But of course, Diane herself, has accepted she was wrong to say that. But equally, I think at the end of the day, we have to take into account that Diane over the years has done excellent work in community cohesion and integration. Absolutely.
But she should be sacked anyway.
But when you make a mistake in politics,
well, let me talk to you about. Well, let me talk to you, Rehman, about divide and rule. I infer from both your first and your second name that your antecedents are in the subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent. Am I right?
And of course, my parents were from Pakistan, Kashmir.
Indeed. From Kashmir, my goodness. Now, Britain ruled 560 million people in the Indian subcontinent with 40,000 officials. They did so by dividing and ruling the peoples of the Indian subcontinent. Do you accept that?
George, I think what we're looking at is the 21st century.
Rehman, don't dodge me. Do you accept that? Do you accept that? Look, I know you're trying your best to win some votes in Gillingham and Raynham.
Well, not at all. It's not about winning votes.
I'm asking you, as a Pakistani Kashmiri.
George, I'm really sorry, but I think it's really sad when you want to, go into this.
Well, this is what she was talking about.
Race relations. When we want to say when politicians, when they make a mistake, she's accepted. She made a mistake. Otherwise, she would not have apologized.
You can talk as long as you like, but I'm still going to ask you the same question
George,
again.
I'm really sorry. You can ask the same question. I'll give you the same answer. What she said was completely unacceptable.
I'm asking you, as a person of Pakistani and Kashmiri, for God's sake, antecedents, did the British Empire divide the better to rule the hundreds of millions of people in your parents' country? Yes or no?
George, I'm really sorry, but I think your comment is completely out of place.
But is it true? But is it true?
No, I don't agree with that at all.
Oh, you don't?
I don't agree with that.
How did they do it then? How did the British? How did the British Raj? Rehman.
How history was, was dealt with.
Rehman, how did the British Raj manage to, with 40,000 officials, control and occupy hundreds of millions of people, including your parents and grandparents, if not by dividing and ruling them? You know that to be true. It's you that's being dishonest.
I think the comment made by Dan was a racist comment. I'm really sorry. I dealt for many years as a barrister. I prosecuted.
You're a barrister? You're a barrister and you're a barrister and you can't answer my question?
George, I just said to you, I totally disagree with you. I'm sorry.
Okay, you totally disagree with me. That the British divided and ruled the people of the Indian subcontinent. Is that really what you're saying?
I disagree with what you just said, but let me put it to you.
Well, you are the only living person of Indian or Pakistani, still less Kashmiri origin, who is prepared to deny that the British Empire divided the better to rule your people. You are the only one.
George,
are you really telling the truth? Are you telling the truth, Rehman?
I'm really sorry.
Are you telling the truth, Rehman?
George, I am being as fairly frank as I am.
Are you telling the truth? No, I'm asking you, are you telling the truth?
Yes, of course I'm telling the truth. For me, from my perspective, from my own personal view, what I said to you is I totally disagree with what you said. And the point made by Diane was a racist comment. And
all I'm going to say to you, Mr. Chishti, Barrister Chishti, is you ought to hang your head in shame. Because you know that what you've just said is untrue and false. You know, your father knows, your mother knows, and every person listening to this show of the same background as you knows that the only conceivable way that 40,000 officials could govern and occupy the hundreds of millions of people in the Indian subcontinent was by dividing Muslims against Hindus against Sikhs, by promoting Sikhs one day and Muslims the next day, by dividing the peoples of the subcontinent the better to rule them. You know, as a barrister, as an educated man, you know that that's true, and yet for your own grubby political reasons, as the MP for Gillingham and Rainham, you have thrice, and I emphasise thrice, denied the truth here on national radio. You should hang your head in shame.
UKIP MEP Godfrey Bloom was on the programme yesterday with his views on maternity rights. He's back in the news today. This time he was on video saying we shouldn't be sending aid to somewhere he called Bongo Bongo Land. Mr Bloom was filmed speaking at a meeting in Wordsley near Stourbridge in July, and it was passed to the Guardian newspaper. Here's a clip from that recording.
How we can possibly be giving £1 billion a month when we're in this sort of debt to Bongo Bongo Land is completely beyond me. To buy Rehman sunglasses, apartments in Paris, Ferraris, and all the rest of it goes with most of foreign aid. F-18s for Pakistan. We need a new squadron of F-18s, a couple of squadrons. Who's got the squadrons? Pakistan, where we send the money.
So where is Bongo Bongo Land? Are we really sending money abroad to be spent on Ray-Bans, apartments in Paris and Ferraris, if you couldn't hear the whole thing there? Should a politician use this sort of language in a debate about foreign aid? You might agree with Godfrey Bloom. You think foreign aid's a total waste of money. You may not like his language, but you might agree with that. Maybe you're siding with David Cameron. He thinks it's in everyone's interests to build a more prosperous world. Otherwise, the problems of conflict, mass migration and uncontrollable climate change will come and visit us at home. There are many views on this. And let's get to welcome back to the Jeremy Vine Show, Godfrey Bloom. Hello, Mr Bloom.
Hello again, Paddy.
Hello. And George Galloway, the Respect MP for Bradford West, is on the phone. Hello to you, Mr Galloway.
Hi there.
Hi. Mr Bloom, UKIP have asked you not to use the phrase again. What was the phrase you used?
I used the phrase Bongo Bongo Land in much the same way as I would use, or anybody would use, the word Ruritania or the Third World. It's whatever you want it to be. There is no such place, of course, so I can't understand how anybody could be upset when an imaginary country.
Right, but so the UKIP chairman, Steve Crowther, has said, please don't use the phrase again, and you've just used it again.
Didn't you ask me to use the phrase? I'm sorry.
Well, I asked you to, but he asked you not to.
Oh, right, sorry. Oh, dear, oh, dear. I'm terribly sorry, Party Chairman. If I used it again, I didn't mean to. It slipped out.
What was the phrase that you used then?
I said, well, you just played the clip there. Everybody heard the clip. But let's get back to the really serious point. Let's get to the serious point. £1 billion a month in overseas aid, when in my constituency, I've got people in a queue waiting for cancer treatment, dialysis machines. We're cutting our A&E. We're making all these terrible sacrifices in this country, and we're giving away £1 billion a month, and we don't even know where most of it goes.
George Galloway, do you know where it goes?
Well, look, the fact that Godfrey is surprised that people find this offensive is, I suppose, the least surprising but most important part of this discussion. The UKIP profile of anti-immigration, red-faced Englishmen standing at the ports on the Channel shouting boo at Johnny Foreigner is the real UKIP. Nigel Farage, a more sophisticated man than people imagine, is not himself a racist, but he's clearly leading a coalition of the kind of supercilious, blustering racism that you've just been listening to. Anybody who thinks that describing the rest of the world as bongo land, not being offensive, doesn't deserve to be in politics.
So you're offended by Mr. Bloom?
Well, I'm offended on the part of those who are insulted by it. I'm embarrassed as a British person that someone sitting in the European Parliament and doing rather well out of it should have these kind of views and express them. Usually when they don't expect someone to be filming or recording it. But he's brought shame to the country with this language, short of having an imaginary bone in his nose when he said it. It's hard to see that it could be more offensive. The issues of immigration and the instability in the world due to the maldistribution of resources are vital and real issues, and David Cameron is right about that. You can't say that, as UKIP do, that you don't want foreigners coming here, but you want foreigners to continue to exist in a situation of dire poverty and underdevelopment. This is just a contradiction in terms.
So, Godfrey Bloom, you're an embarrassment. You've brought shame by your language. You could express this as a debate with George on foreign aid, but you've brought shame and embarrassed him because of the bongo ding-dong.
Well, of course, I've never heard so much nonsense. The actual point of the matter is everybody's saying, oh, gosh, isn't this offensive? But everybody seems to be offended on behalf of somebody else. Nobody actually I've spoken to is personally offended because no offence was intended. So that's absolute nonsense. And incidentally, that was a 40-minute speech without notes delivered. It was a public open speech, and it's been on YouTube, I think, now for something like 4 or 5 weeks. So this isn't some clever thing that The Guardian have dug up. And let me just put George Galloway right, because he needs a little bit of help on this one, I think. We're sending money to the Indian subcontinent, who have a nuclear-powered carrier, a space programme, F-16s for Pakistan, and would you believe some of our money actually goes to Argentina, where they've just bought 20 Mirage jets, which could be used against us. There's no audit trail. There's no audit trail. We don't know where the money goes. £400 million of it a month, 400 million a month, goes to the European Union for them to distribute. And as I say, George Galloway should be putting his own constituents first in a very poor part of West Yorkshire. He should be putting them first, thank you very much, and not everybody else.
Well, these are legitimate debating points about the use of foreign aid, but you don't have to describe the people getting the foreign aid as bongo land. India is a vitally important trading partner with us, in which we're trying to do very much better. And incidentally, the aid program is designed to buttress that. It won't go down very well in the places we're seeking to win friends and influence people and maybe get 1 or 2 customers, Godfrey, to be describing their countries as bongo land. Everyone listening to this knows this in their heart. It displays, however, what's really in your heart. And what's really in your heart is a belief that the rest of the world is bongo land, and we live in some Elysian field that is superior to them. That's what lies behind your remarks. Everybody knows it. Otherwise, these words would not have come to your lips, unscripted, 40 minutes speech or otherwise. They came to your lips because they're in your heart, because that's what you really think of Johnny Foreigner. And it's the fact that you really think that, and that you're an elected UKIP member of the European Parliament.
Can I get a word in here, Chairman? Can I speak? Am I allowed to speak on this programme?
Please speak now, and you joined us yesterday.
You'll have an extra programme. What are you talking about?
I am chairing, and I would like you to reply, Godfrey. Please go ahead.
Let me tell you what is in my heart. George Galloway doesn't know what's in my heart. My heart is... My country is in my heart. My constituents are in my heart. My people are in my heart. And when I see them not getting dialysis machines, when I see them not treated for cancer, when I see A&E wings closes, when I see us more than £1 trillion in debt, I say enough is enough. No more money to be sent abroad. Let's start at home. Charity begins at home. And incidentally, Mr. Galloway, the overwhelming response today has been in support of me.
Well, I'm sure that there are people whose knuckles are dragging along the pavement who like to think of foreigners as bongo land residents. I'm sure that's true. That's why UKIP gets the votes that it gets. But you can't pretend that you're offended by trailer posters from the Home Office. You can't pretend that you think it's not the British way to be profiling people on a racial basis, as Mr. Farage was doing just the other day on television and getting some credit for it. And yet, at the slightest excuse, when scratched, display this kind of mentality.
A question for
me.
me.
It's not the fault of anybody in the countries you're referring to in such insulting terms that there's a shortage of dialysis machines in Britain.
Now, a question.
That's the fault of the British government.
Okay, let me just.
Why don't you concentrate your fire on them instead of insulting foreigners?
Right, now, a question from me, Mr. Galloway. I think you've both had an opportunity to address each other. If you look at how UK aid is spent, Mr. Galloway, a sixth goes to the EU to spend how it wants. So that's 800,000 was spent on a water park in Morocco. Iceland got 20 million. 5 million was spent in Bangladesh, setting up a question time style television programme. What do you think about those sorts of spending of British taxpayers' money?
Well, I'll answer that, but this discussion isn't about foreign aid.
Well, it's about
the attitude displayed by UKIP
this question
towards
is
people in poor countries.
Yeah, I think
these are legitimate debating points.
Yes, we'll have a go.
I'm not in charge of the British aid budget.
But if you were...
If I were, there may be some of those that you've referred to, if you've accurately described them, that would be questionable.
Right.
I have a long involvement in issues of foreign aid. What I'm saying to you is that there are billions of very poor people in the world. Many of them don't have access to water. Many of them don't have access to enough food or medicine. That makes an unstable and usually violent world, and it's in everyone's interests to reduce the inequality in the world, to try and help other people come up closer to our standards. Then, Mr. Bloom, they might not be so determined to get, by any means possible, out of their own countries into other people's countries.
Mr.
That's
Bloom,
just common sense.
How do you like those remarks? He's saying, yes, there are some bits of the budget he wouldn't spend, but the problem is the tone.
No, I don't accept that. I'm sorry, I simply just don't accept it. I believe that people should give money to charity. We're one of the most generous nations in the world. We give more to charity per capita than any other industrialised democracy. But what I would argue, it is not the responsibility of government to take from people in my constituency, some of whom are only trying to get by on £120 a week, to take tax off them and send it abroad when we don't even have a proper audit trail. For those who are rich, like David Cameron, who's a very wealthy man, sit down, get your chequebook out and give a cheque to save the children. Do not take it from my poor constituents in this country who are living on the breadline. I won't have it, and I never will.
George, do you think we're going to be... This is the tone now for all the way up to the election?
Yes, we're into the dark territory of stirring racial fears, xenophobia, hatred of foreigners, whether European foreigners or in, as Mr. Bloom would have it, Bongo land. This is the kind of road that in recessions right-wing politicians take. Mr. Bloom is an archetypal one, a Jim and Jag stockbroker belt bigot, and he brought shame on the country, and most civilised people in the country know it.
OK, that's to you, George, and to you, Godfrey Bloom. Thank you for joining us. One quick one from you. Do you going to put the language of the bongo behind you?
Well, I must be doing something right in politics if I can get that sort of ridiculous diatribe from George Galloway.
All right,
I must be doing something right.
OK, thank you both very much indeed for joining me. We were listening there to Godfrey Bloom, UKIP MEP for Yorkshire North Lincolnshire, George Galloway, Respect MP for Bradford West. I heard no agreement at all. The issue of foreign aid is in there, the issue of the tone. What did you think as you listened to that debate?
One man who is no doubt as happy as the proverbial pig at the travails of the European Union is the man who damns it and virtually all its works, except the wages section. Nigel Farage, a very welcome guest, and the leader, of course, of UKIP, and a redoubtable campaigner. Nigel, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Good evening, George. Nice to talk to you.
Now,
And,
am I right that you're delighted?
well, look, this was the issue that got me into politics. You know, I was working in the City of London as a broker, and in 1990, the British government signed us up for the exchange rate mechanism, pegging sterling against the Deutschmark. I uttered a whole stream of obscenities when I first heard this had happened, predicted it wouldn't work, and it got me involved in politics. Am I pleased that it's on the edge of destruction? In one way, yes, but in another way, no, because actually there's going to be a very big human price to this too.
Well, and not just for foreign humans, but also for us, because 50% or more of our trade is with the European Union, and a very concerned. I was just looking at the Irish figures the other day after I saw Question Time. The amount of our goods and services that are purchased in the Eurozone, including in the Republic of Ireland, just a few hundred yards from a part of our territory at least, it's going to be bad news for Britain as well as Johnny Foreigner.
Well, of course it is. And I mean, you know, if Europe does badly, if America does badly, all these things affect Britain, and it'll affect our exports of goods and services. Of that, there's no doubt. However, when you look at what's happening in Greece today, where Greece, a country with huge problems, I mean, their deficit is even worse than ours, and that's without Gordon Brown being there. They've got this massive...
Oh, that's a bit harsh, Nigel. Would have been in the Euro if it hadn't been for Gordon Brown.
Well, I tell you what, it's the one good thing he did, because had we been in the Euro, we would now be like Greece, of course, having had the wrong interest rates and everything else. But here you've got Greece, the country that invented democracy, now being governed by 3 foreign officials who once every couple of weeks land in a plane at Athens airport and go and tell the Greek government what their tax policy must be, what their spending policy must be, and the total humiliation that the Greeks are now being put through is why there are hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets every day. And if Greece is kept imprisoned in the Euro by the big bankers and by the European bureaucrats and the World Bank and everybody else, then frankly, George, it will end in a revolution. So I think it is better to take the pain, for Greece to default, to go back to the drachma. Yes, of course, there'll be collateral damage for Greece and everybody else, but better to do that. Get your independence back, get your democracy back, and get back your pride and self-respect. So it's going to be very painful, but it needs to happen.
One thing that's not widely known is that when they talk about these bailouts and so on, one might be forgiven for imagining that the Greek people were being bailed out, that a lump of money was being given to help them. In fact, when we give them these bailouts, those bailouts go directly to the banks.
That's absolutely right. I mean, in fact, what is happening is we give money to Greece and they give it back to our banks, who should never have lent them the money in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the reality is that the Greeks are so indebted they can barely service the interest on the debts, all right? And what we're doing is we're forcing them to take on yet more debt. I mean, the whole thing is completely and utterly barking mad. It cannot last. Greece will default. Portugal will default. I suspect in time Ireland too will probably default. And we're going to finish up with the Eurozone, which will be effectively a greater Deutschmark area. That, I think, is what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, that may very well be what happens. What should happen is another matter, of course. You're a supporter of free market capitalism. You're a supporter of you were yourself in this city.
Yeah.
Here, this is a system that allows a 31-year-old man, not allows, but makes it possible for a 31-year-old man, allegedly, to cost a bank $2 billion because of gambling.
Well, look, you know, I mean, things go wrong in the private sector. Let's not, you know, kid ourselves that awful things don't go wrong in the public sector. Just look at the billions of pounds we wasted on a new computer system for the National Health Service. So
that's true, Nigel, but no 31-year-old man in the public sector could spend $2 billion. That's not possible.
No, but a 51-year-old man could, or woman could, and in the case of the NHS, they have. So I mean, you know, stupidities are not confined to the private sector. I would agree that there is still a lot wrong with the investment banking system. It is still open to abuse. What it needs is good regulation, proper regulation, and what actually we've had is we've created the Financial Services Authority. There are 3,000 staff down in Canary Wharf, taking up a building, and frankly, they've been as good as useless. You know, I believe in free markets, but for free markets to work properly, they need good rules. And really, ever since 2007-8, when this whole credit crunch first hit, you know, politicians blame the bankers, but actually, it's the politicians and regulators that have not put in place proper rules.
Nigel, I'm glad you're back in the saddle. That last lad you had was not much cop. I mean, they must be glad to have you back at the UKIP.
Well, I don't know. I hope so. I'm back doing it. It's 7 days a week. It's all the hours God sends. But you know what? I'm enjoying it. And I absolutely believe that we're going to get our democracy back in this country. And, George, whether we're on the left or the right is irrelevant. We should be governing our own country, not having little people like Herman Van Rompuy making our rules.
Thanks very much, Nigel Farage. Keep on taking the wages and the X's, though. 08717 223344, leader of UKIP. Great campaigner. Great to have him back. This is George Galloway. This is The Week. This is TalkSport. Now, every week there's going to be a challenge match between me and a worthy adversary. And for the first bout, we certainly have that. He's Nigel Farage, member of the European Parliament, tried to be a member of the British Parliament, has fought his way back from a very difficult aeroplane accident during the campaign, and we thank God for his safe delivery from that. But he's a controversial figure, or he wouldn't be here challenging me. He wants to ban the burqa in Britain, in public spaces. And I'm the man to face him. Nigel Farage, welcome.
Good evening, George.
Nice to talk to you again, my friend. Are you feeling better?
Yeah, I mean, considering what I went through, remarkably so. Bit of a sore back, but other than that, I'm absolutely back to normal, yes.
God is great.
Absolutely. I've been a very lucky boy.
Now, Nigel, set out your stall, set out your case. Why should we ban the burqa in Britain?
Well, I was in Westminster today, and standing outside a pub, and a group of women, or at least I think they were women, wearing the burqa, walked past. And it was very interesting just to look at the reaction of everybody there. And you could see that people feel uncomfortable about this. Now, I think the burqa and the increased wearing of it is a sign, a symbol, if you like, of an increasingly divided society. Now, the question is, what do we do about that, given that I think we all want to live together in one society, under the same set of laws and the same set of rules?
As long as they wear the same gear as us.
Well, it's not a question of the same gear. You know, what we're talking about here isn't headdress or different coloured clothes. What we're talking about here is the covering of the face. Now, I don't think that it's practical or sensible to go down the road that the French have gone down, and it looks like the Belgians are going down, of banning people from wearing the burqa walking down the street. I don't think that works, because, you know, we might get a cold January and I might want to wear a balaclava or something like that. So I don't think in the street it's actually enforceable. But where it is enforceable is to say, look, we have to have the same law for everybody. If somebody can't go into Blue Water Shopping Centre covering their face, and if you can't go around the London Underground covering your face, and if you have to show your face going through security at an airport or wherever else it may be, then it needs to be the same rule for everybody.
But it is, Nigel.
Well, I don't think it is, because it's not being applied that way. I mean,
Trust me, a woman in a burqa in an airport has to take her head covering off.
Well, if she walks into a bank, she doesn't. If she's on the underground train, she doesn't. And certainly if she's in Blue Water, she doesn't. So what I'm saying is, I think that in public buildings and public spaces like that, the law should be the same for everybody, and we should all have to show our faces. I do not want to provoke a row or a war with Islam. That is not my intention at all. But I do think we need to send a sign, a signal, that we don't want to live in a society where some people cover their faces, which makes the rest of us, I think, feel very uncomfortable.
Well, you say that, Nigel, but your erstwhile leader of your party, Lord Pearson, invited to the House of Lords the most notorious Muslim-baiting politician in Europe, Geert Wilders. So I'm putting it to you that you do want a war with Islam.
No, I mean, you know, Lord Pearson has his own view on this. You asked me for my view, and my view is our party's policy. I mean, the point that Lord Pearson was making, and you're right, Wilders is an extremely controversial figure. But the point that Pearson was making is there should be freedom of speech, and we should not be banning the film Fitna that Wilders had produced.
So we shouldn't be banning a Muslim hate film, but we should be banning Muslim clothing.
We should not be banning a debate, and I think that's absolutely fundamental, and something, George, that you would, fight for and have done all through your political career. And it was quite wrong of Jackie Smith, who was then the Home Secretary, to ban Wilders from even coming into Britain. That does not make sense, and what we're looking for within society is for one law to apply to everybody. And look, this is going much further. I mean, we have places like Croydon and places like Leicester, where now in public swimming baths, there are male-only days and female-only days.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Because this is being forced upon us through our own cowardice, admittedly, because we're bowing down to some of the more extreme elements of Islam who want us to have a divided society, who want us to live in a country where women don't have equal rights. And
but there are many women, Nigel, who are happy with women-only bathing sessions, not just Muslims. But I can't let you off on this because I think you've made if you don't mind my saying so, in debating terms, you've made a major logical flaw here. You're for freedom of speech, but you're against freedom of attire.
We are for freedom of speech, we want open debate, but we also want to live in a society where one law applies equally to everybody. And you know yourself, there are elements in Britain calling for Sharia law. Do you want to live in a country where in one city there are two types of law? I certainly don't.
But that's you're mixing two entirely separate issues. First of all, there can never be Sharia law in this country unless we have a majority in the House of Commons legislating for it, and you've only got to state that proposition to see how absurd it is. It's a straw man you've just erected there, Nigel.
Unless the police choose to turn a blind eye, and there is evidence in some places that is beginning to happen.
Well, tell me what
we don't want to live in a divided society, George.
No, but you're the one who's creating the division.
Most certainly not. Most certainly not.
Why can't we live and let live, Nigel? Let people wear what gear they want to wear.
We have been the most tolerant country, certainly in the European time zone, for century after century.
Well, that's right. Why should we change it now? Why change it now, then?
And we'll go on doing that. But let's have equality before the law. And if I'm not allowed to cover my face in that West Bank, then nor should anybody else be able to.
Nigel Farage, UKIP MEP, former leader of the party, perhaps future leader of the party.